All right. So, cool.
And we should be online for the folks out there to see.
Nice.
It'll
Your
lag a little
sound
bit
check.
before you see it. Yeah, let me know that you see it. You got anything? I'll keep talking until you hear something.
Okay, we're live on YouTube.
Yep.
Let me check the audio.
Here we go for the fun loop back for everybody out there.
Audio's coming through.
Cool. Well, I will start us out and say welcome to the show. This is Don't Call Me for IT Support. We are not your typical IT guys. We always say that. We never give a real descriptor about it, and I always used to go back and say that it's because we don't work in the IT field. We just actually use it. We use the products, but we have a lot of knowledge about them. This is episode 25, Memory Storage and Why It Matters to You. I am Brad Medlin. That's Chris Touchberry, and we have a special guest. I'll let him introduce himself and give us a little bit about him.
Hi, I'm Jake Box, and I'm lucky enough to work at Kingston Technology, and I get to sell memory and storage. So,
got the knowledge and got the source here with us.
Thank you.
We are just a couple of guys that have a dream of better helping folks out there better navigate the crazy world of workstations and other fun work technologies. Donald may stop in later on. He's been at a family event, but this was a fun opportunity to get here together with Jake. So we're going to go ahead and get on the ball with this. We're going to start with the basics. So kind of give everybody a rundown that there are different types of storage and memory. Memory is very different from storage, but has a lot of the same principles. But we'll go back and reference the old school technology names of RAM and ROM for those that don't remember those days. Fun quiz. Does anybody remember what ROM stands for?
Read only.
That is correct. It is read only memory. And RAM is random access.
Access, yes.
Yep, it's a fun one to go back to it. Back in the old hard drive days when you had serial connections before they, and even parallel connections before they were serial.
Well, also remember before it was DRAM, it was SRAM.
That's right. And SRAM is still the technical name for cache on board a CPU.
Yes.
And it is still the fastest of all you can access whenever you put it on a CPU like that. So our rundown has a lot of fun things involved. And if you scroll down and see and check it out, it's great. We'd love for you to comment, ask questions as we go. There's a lot of different standards we're going to kind of go over today, just so everybody kind of understands them, because the times are changing. We're everybody and their brother knows and uses an M.2 drive most likely. And those are always the fun ones. The little gum stick tiny drives that are, oh man, they're so itty bitty. I wish I had one sitting around me. I probably do.
Wait, I think I have one. Hold on.
Oh, I do too if I go in my backpack, I'm sure. But I don't want to dig through that right now.
Of course, Jake has one. Of course.
Oh,
I have it. Actually, I have a soda stick sitting right next to me.
It's pretty close.
Here, let's just. Yeah, I have something here too. See? Oh wait, let's put it in my face first. It's it's legitimately a stick of gum.
Yeah, they're tiny. There it is.
Yeah, I mean it is a stick of gum.
Yeah, and just don't chew it because it'll be crunchy.
No. You'll be upset.
And then you have the old school 3.5-inch hard drives and 2.5-inch hard drives, which 2.5 is still a storage medium for SSDs. Keep that in mind. Not a lot of people use those, but it is still a medium. And then we also have the other fun piece that we like to talk about, which is
something like this is your 2.5er.
Yep.
Let's turn off my
the background blur first. Is that a guitar? Am I seeing a guitar in the background blur?
No, you are not.
Dang it! I thought I was getting ready to get hopeful, man.
Let's see.
There it is.
There we go.
There it is.
There we go.
Yep. Good old
that
480.
is I have no idea what that is. I think you might. It just looks like it might be something laying up
It
against
just looks
the
like
wall.
a headstock on to your right, I guess.
No, sorry, I'm not. No.
Dang. Most creatives have a lot of creatives involved, anyways.
That's not me. That was
Ah.
never me.
Hey, I'm sure you're just as creative in another way.
I have no rhythm. That's the problem. It's the rhythm part for me. It's not, So there we go.
Well, I'll go ahead and tell you, I'm a drummer, so I have a lot of rhythm.
Oh, well, yeah, that means and I know I had a good buddy when I was growing up that was a drummer, and that was a guy who he knew how to play every instrument he picked up, and if he didn't, you gave him like 15 minutes, and he'd be like, "Hey, I can knock this song out," and I was like, "Dude,
how? Why?
Okay.
Where did this come from?" Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. People's skills the way they're blessed. So yes, I totally. You're a drummer. That's the best musician in the band. I already know that.
False. I was just the guy that kept the beat. I was just the backbone, is what we called it. But yeah, and this is the way we do. We go down these little side channels. They're just hilarious and fun to talk about. We get to have these are the way we delve. I mean, I'm building a recording setup while I'm doing this too, so it's kind of fun. I've got a whole recording board over here to my right and whatnot that I've been working on. I've been rearranging the office recently, and everybody's like, why do you have this? Is it for the podcast? I was like, it's for that. Yeah, it's going to help, but it's not just for that. So, I mean, there's other reasons.
I like it.
Oh yeah, it comes in handy. That is for sure. The other fun thing I'll say though is, as we've been doing the show and tell is, you've got all the various, drive types. The one thing that I think is funny though about the SATA drive, and so we'll talk SATA for a second here, because SATA it's the backbone of any computer. If you go into any desktop, most laptops still have a SATA port, even if you can't use it. I give my perfect example of the Precision 7770 I've got sitting in my leg. It's a powerful little laptop. It's got 4 NVMe bays. Still has a SATA drive, but not if you go for top-end hardware, because you need the bigger battery. So what do? They sacrifice the SATA bay to put a bigger battery in. Everybody in their pursuit of thinner and lighter, which I'll go ahead and say it, when it comes to a workstation laptop, that kind of drives me up a wall. Like, guys, we're expecting it to be 20 pounds, 25 pounds with the power supply and a thick boy to cool the sucker. Don't skimp. We don't need it to be thinner and lighter. We don't care. It's like, as a workstation professional, we want it to run extremely well. We want the performance, not the thin and lightness of it.
I think that you're always the OEMs are always going to try to balance that, and I think just nowadays, because of some manufacturers, success, they're going to go to aesthetic a lot, and I agree with you. That's why you see some of these guys that, when they stay in their lane with workstations, they just shoot success to the moon.
Well, I tell you, we got an upcoming episode that we're going to be doing where we're interviewing a friend of mine from England that has been working with Autodesk Inventor for years. And he and I have been talking, just back and forth about it. And he put a video out the other day. His name's Tech 3D on YouTube, if you want to follow him or take a look at it. But he's talking about the MSI Creator series.
Yep.
And it's basically like their G77 Titan, whatever it's called now. It's their 17-inch laptop, and which is got like a 3080 Ti and the Core i9 HX chips, and then all the RAM and stuff so damn set up the way it is. But it's got that little piece in the back that sits back behind it where it's got extra thermal capacity. It also comes with a 330 watt power supply, which we can argue about that for years to come if we wanted to, versus a 240 or 250, depending on who you're buying from. The other side of things, but it's back there, and it looks exactly like the gaming laptop without RGB, which really creators don't need it, and it looks kind of professional. And I'm telling you, I wouldn't be surprised to see MSI actually start to take a lot of market share there from some folks, because the Lenovo's and the Dells that I've tested and use on a daily basis, the P16. It outperforms the 7770 from Dell, but it's only marginally. And their drawback still right now is power. They don't have the power budget because you've got and people forget this, that the way Intel is now, yes, it has a TDP or a base power PBP, whatever power base budget of 55 watts. But when you run the thing and you open it up, 157 watts is what they can use. And if you'll let them, they'll use 157 watts all the time. I actually had a fun conversation with Dell Engineering about it because they were looking at mine and I was screen sharing with the actual laptop usage at the time. And sitting idle, I was using 85 watts at the CPU. And they were like, why is it idly using 85 watts? And I was like, because I've disabled anything that would slow it down. And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, I mean, I've gone into I've gone into the Windows reg files. I've done regedit and actually disabled in the power budgets to say, hey, I don't want my processor to go to sleep at any point in time. Run it wide open, 100% of the time, all the time. Screw you guys. We're going home. This is how it's going to be. And,
well, I mean, that's kind of what AMD did with their CPUs. They just take them to the max now and like run here. They're just like, we know the candle can burn this bright. Let's burn it this bright.
And they've left it there. And the thing is, now the only difference in the issue that I run into with AMD is that I feel like they should push their power budgets harder and leave them there. I mean, we sat on AM4 for forever. Now we're on AM5. I mean, you can open it up, guys. I mean, if realistically, power budgets kind of went out the window about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. We don't really care if you're buying a desktop or a laptop these days and you're putting less than a 750 or an 850 watt power supply in there. I mean, you're kind of hurting yourself on a desktop. In a laptop, if you're doing less than, and I have to say it too, to Dell's perspective, their ability to shrink and condense and make their 240 watt smaller than their old 180 and lighter than their old 180 and yet still put out 240 is impressive. And that's something that all of them are. They're impressive when they can do those things. So if that's the case, guys, leave it alone. Let's rock and roll with this sucker. Let's go. Do the right thing here for your consumer. And like I said, when it comes to those big boy laptops, sure, give me an option for a lower power usage whenever I'm doing a presentation or something in a room of executives. But realistically, even in those office environments, when I've run presentations in CAD and whatnot and shown stuff off, nobody cares if the laptop's going spooling up and sounded like a jet engine. In a room full of 30 people, they're just going to talk over it anyways. I mean,
well, usually aren't they usually talking over each other?
That too. That's especially dealing with managers. Oh God, it's awful. Somebody always has to get the last word in too. But how does all this relate back to memory? It's the fact that, we're also, as we get these newer workstations, they're condensing them down and they're making sacrifices. So what sacrifices are you losing? You're losing SATA drives in a lot of laptops. Desktops are I'll give you a great one. The Asus Creator Pro, ProArt Creator Wi-Fi, the 690 and Z690 and Z790, both of them. If you occupy the fourth M.2 slot, you lose 4 SATA slots. I mean, if you're putting 8 SATA drives on a consumer CPU, okay. You've got a extra X4 slot. Go buy a card if you need it that badly. But also, why are you putting eight SATA drives in a consumer build? That's the other question I would have.
All right. Because that's a big boy. That's got some storage on it. There's a reason why you're using all those bays. There should be a reason why.
And there should be a reason at that point to justify going to a better CPU, something that's, more workstation oriented. And that's the other thing that kills me is the dropping of workstation for so long from, and I say AMD has done it because, they really have they've got the market with Threadripper Pro right now until Sapphire Rapids really gets in the hands of everybody. But if you look at Threadripper Pro as from a designer perspective, somebody that works in design software on a regular basis, I like to tell people, I did side-by-side testing. I mean, you could go buy an 18-core Intel CPU and be just as fast as a, Threadripper Pro 32-core, 40-core, and save some money too. You don't have to go for top of the line everything. There's some options there. But back to memory, that's the other thing with CPUs is that because everything's basically been consumer based, you lose DIMMs. So workstations have almost always, every workstation that I've ever bought, workstation in quotations, that I've ever bought has 8 DIMMs. Usually 2 DIMMs per channel. So that gives you, 4 channel memory, something like that. You're going to have options for, maximizing your RAM in that machine if you wanted to, but also it also meant that you could buy cheaper RAM and put more of it in there and it would be faster. Nowadays, you get 4 slots in something and that's about it. And that's kind of a depressing factor. So we'll bring the question to you, Jake. Start with this one.
Sure.
To give you kind of the fun one and let you kind of give the explanation of the difference between DDR4 and DDR5 and in those senses, how ECC plays into both of those.
Okay, so the difference between DDR4 and DDR5 is that's generation, right? So we're really talking about you're moving speeds and technology along. So you have different dies, different size bits and bytes when it comes to each cell of the DRAM. And then here's the other thing is with D5, because of the change in technology, you now have more components on a DIMM than you used to in DDR4. There used to not be a power management chip on board and a few other things. There is now a power management chip on D5 because these DIMMs are starting to pull more power, especially when you start to crank them up to the speeds that you're getting. I mean, look at D4 right now is your two D4 speeds are 3200 and 3600. And if you go to ECC, I just quoted something out like this. They're like, hey, we're upgrading our Cisco. We need to match these 2933s. I'm like, I don't even do 2933s. Here's some 3200s. They'll downshift and match if you're going to mix, or put them all in there and you'll just run at 3200 and you'll get some more performance. So then there's that. And then ECC is error correcting. So essentially there's another component on those modules that's making sure that there's no data corruption in those modules, because data corruption can happen. Your ECC memory is very important information. That's your workstation machines and your server, your data centers. That is not your gaming, your normal, Core i5, i6. There are some Core i9s out there where you can mix and match. You know what I mean? Because the Core i9 is really set up to be either a consumer or a prosumer. Let's call it a prosumer CPU. And then if you really want to call it, if it's a true workstation CPU, it's probably going to be Xeon.
So
not always, but like that's what the semiconductors guys would call a true workstation is a Xeon. Not me. I look at the whole entire build for a workstation, but the CPU guys would call Xeon a workstation proc.
Well, and that's the fun thing is that with the consumer grade stuff now, Intel's dropped Xeon completely.
Correct.
So because I'm trying to think back. What was? I'm sorry, I have to do it. Just I want to do it, and I'll show it to everybody too. It's actually saved as a freaking like first line process thing to find. Is the ARC page from Intel. Go over, put this up here.
But here I'll tell you, while you're looking for that, I'll just talk a little bit more about like what you're getting with D5 from D4. So, dude, the jump. And I'm going to talk more on the gaming side because I don't think because this is where the RAM's going to really matter, right? Like the speed of the RAM. We're seeing the stability here up to 7200 in D5.
Yep.
And you're talking and now we're talking about 64 gigs of memory at 7200 speed. And I just had a client send me something that they saw, like in a certain setup, they went from 6000 speed memory to 7200 speed memory and saw like a 20 something percent increase in something. And they were like, wait a minute, literally shot me. We're like, hey, I saw this chart and it was the same system, one running at like 56, maybe it was 5600 and 7200. And they were like, look at this performance increase.
Wow. That's
so and I what I also heard as I was getting some more, because D5 is really coming out, and as BIOSes get updated on the gaming side, because the gamers are really leading the D5 stuff right now. Because Sapphire Rapids is coming, we're D5 server memory is right on the cusp. It's right here, probably at the end of Q1. But right now, the gamers are really driving the D5, and D5. I've been told that we're in about a year to 2 years out where you're going to have 128 gig kits that are running for gamers in RGB. So just imagine what we're going to probably see. You're probably going to see 128 gig non-LR DIMMs in D5 here in the next couple of years as the chip technology evolves, because we're kind of in what I learned in D4 was there was like Gen 1 D4 and then there was Gen 2 D4. And when Gen 2 D4 came out, that was when you started seeing higher capacity modules and you started getting 120, or, in D3 it was 64 LRs. Now you had 64 gig RDIMMs. So you're going to see probably 128 gig with D5 non-LR DIMMs, just regular RDIMMs for servers. And that, just imagine, like you said, servers have 16, 24 slots depending on the procs, right?
Yep.
32. Now you're talking, just imagine 128 gig modules all just filled up in a server in an AI application. That is going to be mass amounts of data right there at that CPU.
I mean, if you can imagine the smile on my face when that happens, oh God.
Well, I mean, like you said, it's a few years out because we're just now getting those D5 servers into the market, and you're gonna see that we're gonna have to see that evolution in the chip technology a little bit longer. But
I'm trying to think. I think it was actually December of 2018 when Gen 2 DDR4 came out. And the reason I know that is because that was when I bought my first 32 gig DIMM, or 32 gig per DIMM kit of Corsair memory, which I still use to this day. And I got 256 gigs of it, and I put it on a 10980XE, and holy smokes. It's, and I believe it was a doubling. So like 16 gigs was the max you could get on.
Yes.
No, correct. It was 8 gigs is the max you could get on a DDR3 DIMM, on a UDIMM. So let's backtrack and give some people a little bit of preference here. So you have UDIMM, RDIMM, and LRDIMM.
And SODIMM.
And SODIMM, which is a dying breed, if you ask Dell. Which
I was just going to bring that up. Dell has some new technology that, I'm not sure. We'll see how that goes.
I was going to say, and without telling us that you guys are going to support it, what I would be interested to know is what your thoughts are on if it will become a standard in the industry. Because as someone that's got one that has 128 gig CAM module, it is faster than 128 gigs of SODIMM right now. Right. I think most of that's because the memory controller in 12th gen for laptops, same thing for desktops, it was hindered. I still don't understand to this day why OEMs don't allow you to enable XMP in any kind of a BIOS for a
You mean for a
workstation
Dell,
product.
HP, Lenovo?
Yeah, for like a Dell, HP, Lenovo, for like a workstation product, they ought to allow XMP to just be enabled.
I agree with you 100%, especially on the workstation stuff, because you're really paying a premium, especially from them. You're really paying a premium.
And XMP is built in at a BIOS chip level, at a CPU level to begin with. And so an XMP is extreme memory profile is what it stands for, but it's basically every CPU has an ability to go and match the speed. So the best example I can give, does anyone know off the top of their head what the standard was for the 10980XE when it launched for its memory standard? It's DDR4, obviously. But
it was a DD4 was probably 26. It was D4.
Yep, it's 10th gen Intel. So keep that in mind.
It was probably like 2666.
2400 still.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was going to be like, it was that. Yeah, I thought 20. I kind of wanted to go 24, but 2666 was around the longest. So.
Yep, it really was. But so the point I make is all I have to do in my BIOS is hit one button, enable XMP, one button. And it allows it to go and say, oh, what's the speed of all these chips? And all it does is it looks at the slowest chip and matches that to the CPU.
Mm-hmm.
And that can cause, and the same things is similar for, I can't remember what they call it for AMD. I saw the name for it the other day.
Expo. They call it Expo.
Yeah, Expo.
It's called Expo.
And enabling that, like one of the big things about that is you will get sometimes, especially with AMD CPUs, major performance gains, because with AMD with the Infinity Fabric, you want your RAM to run at the Expo run, which is usually timed exactly to the same timing of the Infinity Fabric. It allows the best performance. Intel's the same way with XMP and running it on the right side, but Intel's a little more lenient in that they'll just pick what they need to do and run it that way, and they'll optimize the CPU to it. But with OEMs not including that, it's just a one-click setup, because you're not overclocking anything, you're not going outside of spec on anything. And what cracks me up more than anything is outside of what they've bought for you or what they've put in there, if you've got a different chip and you upgrade the chip, you're still going to run at the old memory standard. And you could very easily, if you upgrade RAM, you could very easily just get more performance out of a CPU just like that. So UDIM.
Well, 2660. I remember selling 2666.
Yep.
Or I used to remember. I remember selling 3200 upgrades for 2666 machines that had
we're good.
procs that would support 3200, but to save money, in order to save money, they put in 2666 memory.
Yep. And
people coming back going, dude, I'm seeing a huge performance increase. And you're like, well, you doubled your memory, one, but two, you got a faster speed.
Oh yeah.
And like you said, it was already there, and they were never getting it. They were never getting it.
And I'll give you another one that'll crack you up too, is the number of people that go out there and even OEMs that do this for major, vendors and major, corporations that will just put one DIMM in. We want 8 gigs of memory for our laptops. All right, here you go. You're going to get one 8 gig DIMM. When, by the way, buying 2 4 gigs is actually cheaper. And oh, by the way, it's also 2 times as fast. It's not called DDR for, it's not called 2-channel, memory controllers for you to put 1 channel's worth of memory in it. It's called 2-channel because it wants you to put 2 DIMMs in. And
it does. And I will say this, you're absolutely correct, but it comes down to dollars and cents for the OEM guys, right? And it takes it takes twice as long to put 2 DIMMs in as it does 1 DIMM, right? And I'm gonna say this, I made a living for many years selling into that other slot that they left open when I was selling into the B2B space. So thank you, Dell and HP, for kind of slashing your own throat.
Oh, and it's awful too, because all you do is get complaint. So, all right, I'm gonna make you laugh with this. So I have it's an older generation. It's got an 8th generation processor, an old Precision thin and light laptop, or not Precision, Dimension, and it's like I said, it's got an 8th gen Core i5, and it came with one 8 gig DIMM of 2400, memory. And I happened to have laying around an old laptop that we had gotten a while back, and I had four 16 gig 2400 SODIMMs sticks in it, and I was like, you know what? I just want to see how much it helps. So I went and pulled the SODIMM sticks and put 2 in there, 2 16 gigs instead of the 1.8, and was thinking, well, one, if you've ever run a laptop these days, a business modeled laptop with all of the crap and bloat that they have on there, if you load up Windows on these machines, 7 gigs of RAM is in use at startup, and constantly. That's just because of all the crap they put on them. So you load up Teams, you can imagine. Everybody always goes, well, my network goes down. And I'm like, no, your network's probably not going down. It's probably that your machine's shitting the bed. And
yeah.
And
well, and especially now because they've added so much into Teams. Teams is a memory hog. It's a memory, and it's been known since it came out to be a memory hog. I'm working off an older laptop right now that I got I got it in the pandemic as an upgrade.
Yep.
And I got to get another one. It's got like 24 in it, and it'll stutter on Teams, and it used to not. And as soon as, we roll in a new security patch or something like that, and it'll start to stutter. So like he's already telling me, it's time for you to bring your stuff back in. So it just because Teams is so
it's a hog. Yeah,
it's a hog, and just there's so much people using it now. I mean, I don't know how many times I'm sitting on an internal meeting where there's like 4, 5, 6 people on it, and I'm like, hey, I'm stuttering, I gotta turn my camera off. Sorry. Like, it's either I turn my camera off or I'm not gonna get anything.
And the fact that the camera does that of all things too. Which,
right.
Okay, as somebody who is a firm believer and does like Teams enough as is, I'll go ahead and tell you. So, fun fact, we do the recording with Teams on. And like I said, it's done on a machine that's got 18 cores. Now, granted, I have this thing overclocked like it ain't nobody's business. Only because I get to play around and have fun with that. And I have the cooling for it.
Oh, you know what you're doing. You're not. Well, that's the problem is one of the reasons they don't unlock that stuff, Brad, is because guys that don't know what they're doing will just be like, oh, let me push the up button. And then the next thing you know, the thing catches fire, burns down somebody's house.
I got to show you something. All right, I'm doing it. I don't care. So we're going to go to the display. I'm going to turn this on. I'm going to drag this over here. I'm going to put this up on the big screen. So you might not be able to see perfectly, but you'll be able to get to see. I would tell people, if you've never used it before, meet the Intel Extreme Tuning Utility. It's the Intel XTU. It's downloadable on their website. Now I'm not going to mess with settings while we're live because I don't want to trip it. But I mean, I could mess with some of them if I really want. Actually, screw it. I'll go load the profile of what I have. So when we crash, ladies and gentlemen, blame Brad.
Live stream.
Actually, I'm just going to show them. I won't hit apply. So I'll show what I normally run it on. So this will tell you. So this is normally the multiplier clock speeds for what everything's set at, and it runs at these things at 100% of the time. So I have on a Core i9 10980XE. I guess people used to always tell me you must have won the Silicon Lottery because I did the little benchmarking thing, and I'm like the upper 3% of the world when it comes to benchmarking, and they're on this little benchmarking tool, that thing. So with this setup, I have 2 cores that run at 5 gigahertz. I have 2 cores that run at 5.3 gigahertz. Keep in mind, this is Cascade Lake. And then the rest all run at 4.6 at 1.37 volts because I have it at 1.4 volts with a minus 0.03 volt offset. So, and idle, it draw the entire system, which also has 2 A6000s NV linked inside of it, and like I said, 256 gigs of DDR4 3000 and enough drives to where if I plugged more drives in, I tripped a 1,000-watt power supply at startup. I can add no more I could add no more SATA drives. So I know
not even a SATA drive.
Oh yeah, no, SATA drives tripped it. Is actually what would trip the power supply from startup, not NVMe, SATA. So basically, that I go back to say this though is with this machine, I was able to, like I said, with the way it was set up at idle, it burns less than about 300 watts. Now doing some work, I get it to hit 600-700 every now, when I push it. I mean, it's not the big boy that's in the same boxes at the stop, but it's power hungry. It can be power hungry. But I'm okay with that. Once again, if it's doing work, I'm willing to pay it. Right. I got no problem with that. But yeah, but this thing right here, as you use it, if it doesn't like the setup of it, it automatically shuts the machine down and reboots it to default. Shuts the machine down, reboots to default. Like if it's unstable, if there's instability, it shuts it down and reboots it to default. But you can do everything in Windows and do it live too. I also have that's the other thing I say. I tend to forget if I go to all. I have the core cache overclock too, with the voltage offset. So it's the core cache is normally set at a 24x multiplier, and I've got it.
So people say you hit the silicon lottery just because you've overclocked all your stuff and you haven't had any issues.
And it's stable because I can run it at this setting and it be stable. That's why they say, and really when you hit the silicon lottery, that's what it means. Like
you have stability.
Yeah, it's because you can overclock with stability. It's because that you got one of the good CPUs that's highly overclockable. That's what they call the silicon lottery when it comes to the CPU overclocking. So we'll go to another fun fact for you. So back to the memory discussion. So, and we'll talk about SSDs in general. So not necessarily M.2 or SATA. So there's a fun little comparison that people forget when it comes to performance. With an SSD, you have what people I don't think have ever seen in a consumer grade machine, which is SLC, which is single layer capacity. Then you have MLC, which technically everything outside of SLC is MLC, but most of the time MLC is really thought of as DLC or dual layer. Then you hit TLC and QLC. I haven't seen yet, but I know there's been some discussion about a fifth layer being introduced from Samsung from their testing labs for a fifth layer of capacity. And what that does is that's the number of cells. The SL and the C is cell, single layer cell. And if you're looking at it, it's better to see than it is to do. And
we still have the XTU up.
I know. I'm getting ready to move this up. I'm doing it on my side screen before I drag. So unfortunately, as I'm rearranging my office setup, I don't have my actual screen right here where I can see the entire thing directly. I haven't moved that yet. Well, I'm getting a new one. I'm leaving that one over there, but I'm getting a new one, so I'll have that here at the next one. It will, because it'll be here Tuesday.
So I was gonna touch on that. So SLC, I'll just touch on to give the viewers a little bit of a background on it. So SLC, think of the chip as a building, right? And like you said, it's multiple layers, right? So you have an SLC is like a single level house. One story, there's no stairs, right? There's nothing above you, right? So it's limited because you can only fit so much space in that square footage, right? So what do? You build up that's where TLC is. But here's where SLC really stands out is it is like the one that can be written to and deleted the most.
Yep. It's read write.
So
its longevity is amazing.
Lifespan. It has the longest lifespan.
Yeah.
Okay. And then MLC, which we probably don't hear a lot about MLC. It's still used today in a lot of stuff, but it's used in a lot of stuff where it's it's high reliability. It's going to be a long time. I bet you a lot of MLCs using like automobile because it turns off and on a lot, stores a lot, temps, and it has to go through a lot of write cycles. That's like the second level, but because it has 2 levels, you can get that storage, enough storage space. That's why MLC is, and MLC can be used differently in an SSD. You know, they've got to keep them small. In something like the dash behind a car, you can put 12, 16 chips on a board, and it's not going to affect the laptop you're carrying around. You know, it doesn't change the fact
the form
that
factor.
module can go into a BMW, a Toyota, a Corolla, a Civic. It doesn't matter.
It's the form factor ultimately. That's the
right.
that's
Correct.
The
it's
exactly. You're not going on a little M.2 stick of gum.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why. And if you did an MLC on a single stick like that, it's probably going to be a really low thing, but it's going to be like something that you're going to need for high reliability, right? Like so. And
Best one I've seen is a 970 Pro that I have, and the highest capacity you could get for one was a 1 terabyte.
Right. And that's probably because that was MLC at the time, and they could only get like.
It's got 4 cells on it, so it's
whatever it was, like 20 some odd gigs or in. Oop. Yeah. So I know that. Yeah, and I know that you know that's the other thing, and I don't know off the top of my head which one is which, but I know one's like 4-bit per cell, one's 3-bit per cell, and one's. I think TLC, there's 2 different versions of TLC where there's a 2-bit and a 3-bit. And I think MLC and SLC are all 2-bit a cell, and that all matters too. And so, yeah.
And then actually it is PLC for the 5-layer, penta level.
Yes.
It's not.
Well, now if you go back and you look at Hynix versus Samsung versus the chip guys, you know,
Micron,
their technology is similar, but it's different as well. You know, like I think they're all talking about layers now, right? Like they're getting away from SLC, MLC, TLC, QLC, and now they're really talking about it's all a family of flash chips, and they're continuing to stack.
Yep.
I think Hynix, is up to like 256 or 276 layers now, which is this is insane. Like a lot of people don't understand, like they're getting like 512 gigs of storage onto something the size of a postage stamp, and people are like, this is like it's pretty much a technical marvel once you realize how much is being put on these chips.
Oh, and on top of that, to me, is what's funny is you see that and you're like, where are we going to go next? Like what's the next? Because so we were talking about this before, and so to get to the point, the way he's talking about layers, that's part of the next portion of this, which is VNAND. So NAND flash is what we're talking about, but it's VNAND in that it's vertically stacked.
Yep.
So each cell has a layer or each chip is layered with a certain number of layers of these QLC, MLC, bits and set up for them. And so performance also gets hit too when you talk about it. And like I said, this is what we were talking about before. So like a QLC chip, the reason that a lot of these things perform like a MLC or a DLC type chip is usually because at the front of them, they have an SLC, an MLC, or a physical RAM die at the front, storing stuff temporarily and then moving it to the actual long-term storage behind it. And the way that affects performance is exactly that. It's so for the everyday user, who's opening, a Excel spreadsheet or so on and so forth, you're not going to notice anything there, especially when it comes to writes and to reads. But for I'll use myself as this example, person who transfers on a somewhat regular basis, multiple gigabytes per minute, trying to move as many gigabytes as I can on and off of the drive, that affects you massively, because once you hit usually a 1, 2, maybe 4 gig RAM size, once you hit the max level of that cell that it can hold, your speeds go basically down to the write speed of an old 7200 RPM 3.5-inch drive.
Yep.
About 100 to 110 megabytes a second.
Yep.
That's the physical limitations of the actual cell.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I was saying, like, it's the easiest way to like in layman's terms, right? Is
Yep.
it's a building.
Yep.
Like think of it as a building.
Like a
And
house.
when you're on a single story, right? You can move if it's a single story warehouse, you can move product around very easily, right? You don't have to shift stuff from the down to the bottom. But if you're just think of this. SLC was single level, you had 2 with MLC, triple, 4, LQ, 4. Right now you're talking about VNAND, which is up to 276. Now you're talking about like the Vegas casinos. We've all hit the button and had to wait. When Vegas is busy or when right, takes a long time for that elevator to get to the. That's just because it's picking up information and bringing it to where it needs to be. So there is that performance. And that's where, now this is where things like what you're talking about, is there RAM cache on the SSD? What kind of controller is the SSD using? Does the controller have a RAM cache on it, right? Because you can build controllers that have a cache on them, and you can put a physical DRAM cache in front of for them as well. So this is all about how you get performance.
Well,
but at the same time, if you put that DRAM on there, you have to remove a flash chip because there's only so much real estate on that M.2 now. Because we're not, like you said, we're not using this big form factor anymore. We're using this form factor.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. So so that's going to bring me to the next fun thing with this. So, and I'm curious. So this is an opinionated statement or a question.
Sure.
This is, not the basis of your work with Kingston or anything like that. I always preface the questions like this because I kind of want to see where I want your honest opinion. I don't want the Kingston answer, which is, so NVMe has several standards. You've got U.2, you've got M.2, and you've got E3.S.
Yes.
So U.2 is basically a 2.5-inch drive. So you kind of get some, you see those a lot in storage servers. And it runs over the old SAS bus, technically, the SAS connection, but it's still able to hit those high bandwidth speeds.
Well, it has that additional NVMe connector in it too.
Yep.
Yes.
So it's still fast regardless.
Yep.
And then M.2 obviously is the gum stick size. E3.S, those things can get long. And
you're talking about the rulers.
Yep.
See now, okay, I know there's a lot of these out there and I think I know where you're kind of going with this. So I just wanted to make sure that might have to check some of my terminology with you because
you're good.
I know the rulers and some of that U.3 stuff and is a little bit different. So go ahead. I just wanted to preference that.
Yeah. So I'm talking the E3.S ruler looking things.
Yeah.
What I'm curious about is do you think that design will find an optimization in place in desktops and or laptops? And the reason I say that is if you, laptops are long enough, especially the bigger ones, and they don't have to be that full length. E3.S can be like M.2 where you get like a half length version. They're still kind of optimizing the standard a little bit. So I'm curious if you think that that's kind of something where because like you said, we talked about how, the form factor of 2280 versus 22110, nobody uses 22110. Why? Because motherboards, when you put them in there, or even laptops, the slots are only 2280 or smaller. And
I think that what we're probably going to see with that is where popularity, the data center customer is probably going to drive that standard, because I think that standard that we're talking about when it comes to the ruler is really going to be driven at the data center. I think at like the laptop desktop level, you might be able to see some workstations where they get stuff like that, but I think you could even see you really see where I think the industry is going to go. You're already starting to see it, but it's just behind. Like, you see some cases that have like essentially hot swap trays built into them for 2.5-inch that literally just have like little spring mounted studs that like essentially lock into the SSD where the screws would be and turn it into like a hot swap bay on an SSD. I think I think you will probably see something like that, but with an M.2 tray or something of that where you could on the desktop notebook. I'm talking about more on like the consumer grade desktop notebook, maybe even some work.
Those things
Now
called,
you
like the
might see
smart
some
cards.
workstations with a ruler, but you know what? I think that's gonna really. I think the ruler is gonna stay in the data center.
See,
You know,
and I always thought that U.2 might finally take over with them because I mean, go back to the old 2.5 inch size. You could because I mean, realistically, if you got I mean, and I've looked at, I mean, I've seen some out there. U.2 drives themselves, they're massive capacity. Like
yes,
you can really, because once again, it's form factor. Everything gets back to form factor.
yep.
And with U.2 still being in that 2.5 inch drive form factor, you can. I'm trying to remember who it was that Linus and them
Isn't
had.
that's the Nimbus exit drive? It's like a
Yep.
100
Yep.
terabyte drive.
Yes, yes,
Big
yes. I know
boy.
what you're talking about. Yeah. Well, you know, here's the other thing. Like I said, is I think you know you're right. It's all about form factor, right? But that ruler, and I think what we're seeing is because NVMe is really just now getting into the data center, right?
Yep.
Like it's just now really being adopted into the data center. So I don't think that standard has been set.
Yep.
And once a standard has been set, I think there's a battle going on. Is it going to be U.2, U3, the ruler, this? And I think once we figure that out, because if I remember correctly, the ruler's like 12 inches long, but it's only 2 inches wide or something like that. And it's so their whole thought is you can put more chips. They thought about it as an SSD. You can put more chips this way, stack them horizontally in sort of that same way that they were thinking about 2.5 inch. They were just thinking of it as like a big bunch of little 2 inch squares stuck in there, I think. So yes, I think it could come down to what you want. It might be something where you have the ruler is one standard and U.2 is the other standard, and it's just preference on what that data center is.
Yep. And see, like I said, I mean, the data centers it drives so much usually, but the data centers what's been so slow to adopt NVMe in general. And you know, I'll ask that question then. Why do you think the data center has been so slow to adopt? And personally, you know, just so you can get it out there for everybody to understand, from a hard drive perspective, why did they stay with hard drives for so long? Actual physical spinning, rotating hard drives.
Well, here's the thing, right? I think it was for those guys, right? At the time, it was all about how do we maximize dollar for our cloud, right? Like we have to maximize our for every time we sell 100 gigabits of storage to a small business or whatever it is, how do we maximize that dollar amount? I think, and guys like AWS and Google, they are so good at the engineering at the data center level where they can make it seem real fast, that application seem real fast, and then it write to a slow drive and maximize that dollar, maximize your experience.
Yep.
That's great for a small to medium business, mom and pop, whatever. But if you're doing AI or something like that, you might be setting up your own data center, right? Or you might be asking AWS, Google, whoever your data center partner is, like, okay, we need to have this type of hardware. It needs to be hooked to this type of fiber, and it has to be, I need to be this close to it all the time.
Yep.
I think that's why it always comes down to about cost for them, because here's the thing. It's scale, right? Because it's when they build one $25,000 server with 256 gigs of RAM and it's all loaded with 8 terabyte NVMe SSDs, that's a 25, but they need 2,000 of those servers. And now that just turned into a $50 million upgrade to their data center. That I think is what it becomes hard to swallow.
Agreed.
Because they usually buy all at once. It's not like, okay, I'll take one server this week. No. And I did that with a data center guy where when I was in the B2B,
Yep.
that was what they would buy. They would come in and buy, okay, hey Jake, we're buying 40 racks of servers. Each server is going to have 16 DIMMs in it. Jake and I'd be like, okay, how many servers per rack? 12 servers per rack, 40 racks, 16. You're doing math like that.
Yeah. And so I'll get, and I think that the other thing that I think people tend to forget, I need to make sure I select the right setting here so I can look at it when I'm saying my words correctly. So using the, true comparison, it like you said, it comes down to cost. So just using a 1 terabyte drive option now, and we'll talk SATA M.2 and even the old hard drive setup is now, you were looking at it back in the day where, so like a 1 terabyte, and I'm not going to go with something that's non-enterprise grade because that's what they would do. So a gold or non-generalized grade. So a Western Digital gold drive, something that's going to have the longevity. 1 terabyte, the best you can do in a data center drive is, wait, I thought I did say something. So, it's because stupid sponsor.
Gold.
They
I mean,
make
that's
gold
probably-
in a 1 terabyte?
Oh God, yes. Yeah, so
Huh.
you're looking at the standard gold drive with 64 megs of cache, being $49.
I was going to say that's probably a sub $60 part.
However, if you go look at a SATA SSD, and actually, there are some non-SATA, no, they're non-reputable brands, but like the first reputable brand that I come across is Crucial.
Yeah, that's a reputable brand.
And they have, Crucial is by Micron.
They're-
Micron manufactures flash chips.
And let's do Crucial Micron strong in the data center.
Yep. And they have a SATA SSD, $59. Well, $60 when you add
Right.
99 cents. So sub right at $60. Same price as a 1 terabyte Western Digital Gold. So now you've almost hit price parity. Now, once again, because of form factors, you're not going to get a 22 terabyte drive. So yes, hard drives still have a place. They probably always will. It will probably always be in high capacity markets.
Yep.
Which, I mean, okay.
Cold storage.
High
It's
capacity,
cold storage. Cold storage is
cost.
the number one. Cold storage. Cold
NAS
storage.
boxes. NAS
Yep.
boxes,
Yeah.
or even I use myself as reference. So I have 8 terabytes of NVMe as my hot storage setup, and half of it's hot storage, half of it's the OS drive setup because I split it up, rated that way. And then backside behind that is I have so I'll break it down. I have 4 terabytes of NVMe for the OS primarily. I have 4 terabytes of NVMe for what I call hot storage. I have 4 terabytes of SATA SSD for, because I'll explain that in the sense of most applications to this day, when rated together, I have yet to find an application that actually takes advantage of the bandwidth of NVMe, like a real world application. Sure, benchmarks. Sure, certain AI things. There are fringe cases where yes, NVMe is obviously the player, but SATA still works for me, so good to go. Then go down the line from there. I've got 32 terabytes of. Oh no, let's see. It's in several different
storage going everywhere.
Oh, I've got this actual machine has over 100 terabytes. It's probably got 150 terabytes worth of actual storage on board.
Oh my god.
But it's in several rated hard drive packages. But being rated, that's why you have it that way. It's backup to backup, so cold storage doesn't fail you ever. But that's the thing. Cold storage is exactly that. I don't need it to be in the front of everything.
No.
Why would I? Never have, never will.
No, that like even if you're mom and pop company, right? Like when I mean mom and pop, I'm saying you're small business, right? You're a small business. You got to have your cold storage. You got to have your, you're going to keep all your financial records. Like you don't need, 19 or 2005's financial history right up front.
Nope.
You need 2002 and 2001. You don't need 2015.
Yep.
That's just data you need to have when the IRS comes knocking. You can pull it up or whatever, right? Like that's just not. It's not something that's going to be being used anywhere.
And the one benefit to hard drives is that they are, you know, and even SATA SSDs is that you have data recovery practices with those things that are going to be easier for cold storage than it is for a NVMe drive.
Well, you know what? Here, this is a great time to say this because I think what you're touching on is like storage anxiety, right? Like, I'm gonna lose my stuff, right?
Yep.
And when SSDs first came out, because I was in the industry when the SSDs first came out, there was that, like, what happens when it fails, right? Let me explain something about SSDs in layman's terms, okay? To the listener, to the viewer.
Yep.
The only time you are taxing, like I look at it like this, the only way you're taking life out of the SSD is if you're writing to it. If you are extracting information from the drive, there is no tax on that drive. It is only writes that take life out of the drive, not reads. And people don't understand that. They are like, there are people that literally go, okay, I'm going to go open up this file again. They're not taxing their drive.
Nope.
The average person is not taxing their SSD like they think they are. Absolutely. Like if you're an average person with a laptop, desktop, Chris, I wouldn't even say that you're the average person. You might be even above average with what, you know, some of the stuff that you do. Brad's definitely a prosumer, right? Like that's different. Like Brad's taxing a drive because he's slamming that thing with a laser scan. You pulling up your March budget on your Excel file on your laptop is not taxing your SSD. It's not.
Nope.
You pull up Call of Duty, whatever your game, you run your game. It's not taxing. It's not removing life from your SSD.
So
it's not removing it.
And I have to say,
and this is why I used to have clients, Brad. I would literally have clients. I had one call me up and goes, Jake, my customer is calling me, screaming me because I sold them all your SSDs and they're failing like in mass. And I'm like, okay, what SSD did you sell them? Oh yeah, that's a consumer grade. What are they using it for? Oh, they're using it in servers? They literally burned out like 100 drives in like 2 weeks and couldn't figure it out because I'm like, it's not a data center drive. And what, Brad, what did I told him? I'm like, well, we denied the return because we took one back and we looked at it and the light was sucked out of the drive. It wasn't that.
What's that Chia? They Chia mined with it in a server.
It wasn't even like a Chia mine. It wasn't even a Chia mine. It wasn't. It was just whatever their application was a high write application. And it was not a data center SSD. And they smoked them. And literally my test engineers got back and they were like, they sucked every life of blood out of this thing. They used up every cell. If they could write to the cell, they wrote to it.
Yep. So, and I would, like you said, I would consider myself more than a average user when it comes to these things. I'd consider myself a quite honestly, I would consider myself a pro user.
Right, exactly.
So I have a pair of Crucial MX500s SSDs, SATA SSDs, 2 terabytes a piece, so a 4 terabyte, like I said, pool.
And MX500, that's a consumer grade drive.
It is, but I'm gonna tell you a secret. They've been in RAID 0 together since 2017, 16, 17. And they've been written to, like, they're not my primary drive that I use anymore. I'll just go ahead and be honest. But they were, and they've been written to hard over the years. They've never failed. It's because it's all about how you use the drive. You can write to them hard, you know, when you need to, and read and pull up and make, once again, from a design perspective, like somebody like myself is, writing to them with a bunch of tiny files is not going to kill those drives very quickly. Like when you add a bunch of little extra files, that's not going to kill them very quickly. It's you're still going to have to do a bunch of work to them to make that happen. Now, it's not great, but they can still last a while. Now,
Yes.
it all goes back to, like you said, are you buying the right drive for the use case too? And
This is true.
they're not going to have the performance. Once again, even a drive like that, it's not going to have the performance of a super expensive, SATA SSD from back in the day that had. I'll use Samsung's always been my reference to things because they manufacture. And Crucial does it too.
That's a good reference. Samsung is a reference. It's a good reference.
So the old 870 and 860 Pros and 850 Pros, like those drive types, it's not going to have the additional hardware on board. But once again, the way most people like myself use a drive, we're going to having a DRAM cache on a SATA drive for something like that, we're going to exceed that anyways. And SATA itself, you're going to saturate the lanes of SATA far before you saturate the right capacity of a SSD, a NAND flash chip. I mean, you just are.
Because I think like even the lowest grade NAND, right, is rated at like 5,000 writes per cell. And what a lot of people, and as we talk about this, the reason why the controller is so important, right? Because there's 5,000 per cell, right? Like, this is why also SSD is different from like hard drive storage. Is the SSD controller is making sure that the drive gets used evenly. So it's not like it's going to use up the first 3 cells, burn those out, then go to the next. It writes to every cell equally.
Yep.
And goes through it. And that's part of the reason why those controllers are so important in SSD.
And they have to be so smart. So I actually had a fun thing, a fun news article that I was looking at, and I'll throw it on the screen because it does talk about one other piece, which I want to talk about anyways, which is CXL.
Yes.
And so with CXL, CXL is basically based on the PCI Express 5 setup. So ADATA teased a actual CXL card that is DDR5 on a PCI Express setup. And then it also talks about SMI giving Phison, which Phison's a controller builder. So SMI gives it has a new controller as well that's actually giving for a PCI Express 5.0 drive, which, I mean, I'm going to say it just because I got to say it. Who in the ham sandwich is saturating a PCI Express 4 drive? A Gen 4 drive? Like, who's...
you know what?
Real world.
Nobody. Absolutely nobody, Brad. Honestly, it's nobody. I mean, look, I went to CES, what was it, last week?
Yep.
And, up until prior to that, it was like, oh, what's going on with PCIe 5.0? What's going on with PCIe 5? And I'm like, you guys, the port just got to the motherboard, right? And you gamers are still hobbling over price on Gen 4. Why are you even worried about the astronomical price on PCIe Gen 5?
Yep.
Like, the hardcore gamer still buckles sometimes at going to a high-end Gen 4.
And going back to the Optane discussion we had before we started this, if they really cared about performance loading their application, they'd have gone out and bought a cheap U.2 Optane drive, put that in their machine, and run everything off that.
And so, I have Kingston has the KC3000 and the Fury Renegade SSD. Okay, both of those SSDs. I've probably told this to Chris. It's the same drive.
Yep.
It's the same drive. And what I mean by that is it's the same BOM, the same controller, same flash, right? The difference is the firmware. It's hot sauce. And we're talking, I'm looking at it, we're talking the KC3000 is a 7,000 read, 7,000 write drive, right? The Fury Renegade is 7,300 read, 7,000 write. It's the same drive. And the reason I bring this up is people all talk, well, how much is it? Boom. But I can get this WD. Yeah, you can get this WD. Do you want performance? Because what you just threw at me was Gen 3 drive or a Gen 4 drive that's 2,500 megabytes a second less. That's not apples to apples.
Nope. And latency is slower on PCI Express 4.0 over 5 too.
So anybody who's asking for 5.0, I would ask them, where is because I would go to there's 3 top drives out there. The Seagate and the Fury Renegade are on par with each other. The Fire CUDA. I'd say, okay, what is it that Fury or Fire CUDA is not doing for you that you need 5.0?
Yep.
What is it that it is not doing? I've heard this. Jake, when are you going to have 8,000 speed DDR5 modules in PCI 5.0? I have a streamer influencer that needs it. Well, they could have that system, and I could probably find somebody to come up with some 8,000 gig modules, but when you plug them in, everything's going to shudder because there's going to be no BIOS for it, and it's not going to run. You're going to unstable, and if you're an influencer or a streamer, you're gaming, that's how you make your money. You need stability. You want stability. And
we had this conversation like a month ago.
We are in D5 right now. In all honesty, I think the motherboard guys, the memory guys, the video card guys, they have all of us have now probably started to get, those guys have really started to get BIOS into the market that really has good stability with the high-end modules and the high-end cards right now. Because I think when you launch all this new hardware, there's all these bugs, and stability is always an issue.
Yep.
That's
like now there was a ton of bugs, like the VRAM overheating on some of the 3090s in the first couple of months, and these issues with the 4090s always it's the first couple of months.
So okay, and I'm gonna bring that up because we talked about something else earlier that makes me laugh about. So the ADA RTX 6000, yes, they announced it. What feels like almost 4 months ago. How many of them have you seen on the market? There's not a lot. Like, I mean, they're and why is that? They won't send one of those things out until the bugs are fixed. And here's the thing that cracks me up about these even more. So if you look at the ADA 6000, ADA RTX 6000 versus, which I hate calling it that, but it is what it is. If you look at the ADA 6000 versus the 4090, and you think about it from a performance standard, so the ADA RTX 6000 may actually end up outperforming, and when I say outperforming, physically outperforming, like better in everything in the world. Now, it costs a crap ton more, but physically outperforming the 4090 heavily, while only using 320 watts because it has a it doesn't have a PCI Express. It's an EPS 8-pin, so it has a CPU power connector on it. Yeah. CPU 8-pin on it versus the OCFU 12-pin that's too small to begin with and all that stuff. Why? Because guess what? It's not using G6X. And so the memory controller doesn't get as hot and doesn't generate as much heat. And therefore it doesn't need as much power to run that memory controller to push those redonkulous speeds, which, oh, by the way, it gets faster memory, which gives it, with the additional memory that it has, gives it almost a terabyte, if not a little more than a terabyte per second read-write ability of the VRAM.
Yeah.
And all of that no sacrifices made, still only using 320 watts versus 600. And the
9,000.
yeah, and not burning your house down. You know why? Because you don't, like, the professional user doesn't need some redonkulous, and even the general user, I would think. I see that's the one thing about NVIDIA, and but AMD is just stuck with it to begin with. But NVIDIA in general that I don't understand is why the 4090, whatever. Yeah, put G6 or G6X in that. But once you get outside of that, just put high bit rate G6 in there, because you now have G6 that's 19 gigabit per second memory, if not 2100 now, based on the flash modules.
Yeah,
made from Samsung.
you're talking about like the graphics DDR. Yeah, I mean, graphics DDR is fast.
It's ridiculous. So the physical RAM on those, physical memory on them, the memory controllers is what hampers them. You could make a 4070. You could make a 4080 that has a faster GPU physically. The GPU could be a lot faster and still stay in the same power budget if you just went with G6 as opposed to G6X. And you'd save yourself a ton there. Because people forget that the controller is on board of the actual chip now. Go ahead, Chris.
Wasn't Turing on non-X, even up to 2080 Ti, and that peaked at
all of them were
250 watts.
Well, all of them were. The big reason when you went to Ampere was all of them were
Ampere
on G6X,
spiked.
And the power spiked because of the memory controller. Because I remember people sitting there
100 watts.
I remember people there sitting at me and looking at me going, well, because I have an RTX A6000, RTX A6000s, and they're like, that thing, and it power sips comparatively. I mean, it barely draws. I mean, I'll put it to you this way: I can play Microsoft Flight Simulator on this machine and use less than 500 watts of power. And yeah, I mean, so you don't have to. There's no need to try to tell me or persuade me or sway me or make me go one way or the other. I'll go ahead and tell you flat out. There's absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, no way on God's green earth a need for G6X other than saying we have the fastest this on something. Well, okay, put it on your 4090. The 4080 and down, you can save a ton of power, save a ton of operational money. It's cheaper to get G6, and which would mean the consumer could get cheaper stuff. I mean, but which
would also mean a smaller computer.
Oh yeah, I mean,
less space to cool.
Exactly. You could pack it down, and we could argue this till we're blue in the face. What's funny to me though is now now with CXL, you actually generationally, PCI Express doubles every generation, and with 5 now, you've got you're going to have a latency penalty, obviously, but you've got a lane and a link close enough to the CPU that's fast enough to physically push and exceed memory standards.
Well, yeah, because you're in PCI 5, you're looking at like a gig, right?
Yeah.
Or gig a second. I think it's like a whole gig, right? Or no, I mean a terabyte a second.
What's PCI Express 5.0? I can't remember.
It's up there. I think it's like 10. Is it 10,000 or is it 15,000 megabits per second?
Oh, I could tell you here. 1 second. Like I said, we go down this. We go down these fun ones, and you just have to look at it. So 5.0 is physically 63 gigabytes per second bidirectional. So that means that it's 120 gigabytes a second.
It's going to be up to 120 gigs of transfer speeds of it. Yeah.
Yep. And 6.0 goes to 121. 7.0 goes to 242 on an X16.
Look, granted, yes, we're pulling out, people are, these games now that some of these gamers are doing are huge files, right? They're huge, but still, you're talking about transferring a whole game in the blink of an eye.
Oh yeah.
In 5.0.
And so, well, this goes back to that whole why are we using G6X? If the transfer link lane is slower than the actual memory movement lane, guys, that again to me, I'm sitting here going, what's the need up there? And like I said, I bring all that and point all that stuff out and talk about the X16 layout. So 63 gigabytes a second bidirectional, like I said, 120 gigabytes total speed. When you look at PCI Express 5.0, it is, so let me go back and look at my notes on R5. Channel speed. Yeah. So, all right. So if I go back and look at this and get the mathematics right here, you're going to have with DDR5, trying to remember the exact, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head though. The physical, okay, here you go. So with DDR5, all right, at 1.1 volts, the max transfer speed, okay?
1.1?
The max, yeah, at 1.1 volts on a JDEC setup. The max transfer speed is 51.2 gigabytes a second.
Yeah, 5200 speed, yeah.
Yep, at 5200 speed.
Well, at 1.1 volt, that sounds about right. And then I think anything, yeah, you got to start turning up the voltage to get the faster speeds.
Yep. So the reason I use that number and that thought process is, now that's per module, which would be per DIMM, not per channel, not dual channel. So obviously dual channel, you get up to 100 and some change. But if you're putting everything on a PCI Express card using CXL, and you have now, once again, form factor being your limiting factor to a degree of how much memory you can physically fit in a slot. Now you're looking at something where with CXL, you're saying, okay, we can offer these, massive terabyte cards at a reasonable rate because we can fit the cheaper to buy NAND chips on, or, we can fit the cheaper to buy memory chips on, physical memory chips on these boards, and then utilize CXL, and now you can put like a terabyte worth of memory on a CXL card. And oh, by the way, once again, latency penalties aside, because there is a latency penalty to go out and request it
Yes,
from
there is. And it seems like they can be bad, right?
Yep. But there's an opportunity here to where you're not having to go and spend your firstborn child to put a bunch of RAM in a machine and actually have something very fast, to the point where I'm almost curious at some point you'll probably see, and this is actually on a X8 controller, not an X16. So it's not even using the full bandwidth there, but you're going to see some full bandwidth cards coming out here soon that you're basically getting DDR5 speeds. And it's, okay, we had this discussion about Optane earlier, so we're going to bring it back around, full circle back around. It's basically creating what Optane was supposed to be from a perspective of the Optane PMEM DIMMs,
right,
in a card factor where you finally have a use case. So we were talking about what killed Optane, why it never got out there. This CXL, this is what killed Optane.
Well, yeah, and correct. I agree with you. And CXL is really the merging of DDR and flash onto the same module and making them run together in a marathon, like you said. Like, pull it all quick and then let that DRAM distribute it as fast, right? NAND holds it, boom, boom, boom. So if this becomes mass market, and not niche, this will be something that I think we'll see in the future. I think CXL is definitely going to be something that we're going to see in the future.
I would say, it's not going to happen this generation. It'll probably be 5-10 generations down the line.
Right, because I agree with you, because usually when we launch, I remember when DDR4 launched, they were like, when DDR5 launches in this, like, They were already talking about it. There's really no talk about DDR6. So the talk is about CXL. So CXL is the next generation after D5, in my opinion. This is what they're going to work on. And I think this is probably what kills Dell's thing. Because because this is being pushed by the semis, right? And the semis can eventually come down and go, no, Dell, you use semiconductors to build computers. We don't use computers to build semiconductors. Right? Like, as much as Dell and whoever is a big, huge conglomerate, you put Hynix, Samsung, Micron, and Western Digital, and they're bigger than Dell.
Oh yeah.
Right? And they're gonna force their way.
I would go one step further. I think what you're gonna see, and speculations aside, and how you want to look at them, I would think what you're gonna see is two things. One, you're gonna see CXL is gonna take a large portion of what you're talking about, but I think that what Intel is currently doing now with their Xeon scalable chips that have HBM on board.
Yeah.
I think that's so that's kind of the action I see in the future. I see you're going to get processors that have HBM sectioned, because once again, memory works in the system of you have L1 cache, which is right there, lowest level, right next to the physical core on the CPU. You have L2 that's usually shared by cluster cores. You have L3 that's shared by all the cores. Now Intel's throwing HBM on board, and not to be mistaken with AMD and their 3D V-cache. The V-cache is just a expansion of L3. So let's make that clear of L2, I should say, a clear and present danger. So it's helpful, but it's extremely expensive to be that close. HBM was a much cheaper solution to put it on just outside the basic package. Right?
HBM is like L4.
HBM is like an L4 or a system,
It's like almost kind of like a ride along on the silicon.
Yeah.
Versus being right next to versus having to be etched. It's etched into the silicon, but it's etched outside where it's very easy to etch it in a spot. Right. It's not etched right in the middle, right next to all the cores where stuff can go wrong.
And it's etched in a way too in which it's configurable. So you don't have to have. So for example, the example I would give is you're going to give customers options at their CPU level. And then after that, they'll go, okay, for RAM, for physical RAM, that random access memory that you need to store most of your programs, I'd say by PCI Express 7.0's generation, 5 years down the line, you'll probably have a actual CXL card that's where you determine your last level of memory usage. So you'll have an HBM chip that you can say, okay, I want 32, 64, 128 gigs based on my CPU, and I'll buy that CPU with that memory. And that kind of memory will give you that high performance, whatever you need from your core. There's only so far we can go with cores. You can continue to throw more cores on board, but as at some point, you're going to have to stop and say, look, guys, cores aren't where general purpose compute cores aren't where it's at. It's time to go back to the SoC mentality and put as many different things on the physical silicon as we can, and balance balance the system on a chip that way, which sounds like Meteor Lake is where Intel's starting to go. So have that balance on the SoC, and then put you some HBM with it so that you got that low, that extreme low latency accessible stuff, and then a CXL card that's going to say, okay, here's where all of your programs get stored until they get pulled into memory and so on and so forth. Because once again, you don't need it all directly on the setup. That's just it.
But see, this is why. This is why guys like Chris are going to be really important, because they're going to be the guys that have to put systems together like this.
Yep.
Because this isn't going to be, as we know, like everything's going to evolve, right? And you're going to add these things, and the people that are used to dealing with this are going to have to learn how to do, right? It's I always like to bring the computer back to the car. You
Yep.
know, this is eventually you had to learn how to work on an automatic transmission, right? If you worked on transmissions in the living, and
Absolutely.
the automatic transmission came out, so you eventually had to know how to work on that too. So it's evolving. I think as we're kind of in a good spot where I think computing and we're seeing with like GPT and all these kinds of AI things. The computer's getting really, really kind of interesting again. Like
Oh
what
yeah.
it's going to be able to do. You know what I mean? It changed our life years ago, but I think we may see it in my life. I'm a little older than you guys, where I might see where does it twice in your life, where it changes my life twice.
It changed. I'm not the youngest person out there either now. I'm a little bit older than Chris for sure, but I will say it changed mine too. So I mean,
no, but you I was a kid, okay, and my first experience with the computer was I looked over into the corner of the school room and there was the Apple Commodore. That was how I got introduced. So that's what I mean by it's gonna really change my life, because it was sat over in the corner and now it's in my pocket.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So.
And I'll give you that example because we had Macintoshes in our elementary schools to play. I say play, but also do all the learning experiences.
Yes.
But I mean, it's like, yeah, I mean, I think as a process, and Apple's kind of ahead of the game with this, but I had we're probably going to skip over a lot of the news articles anyways, Chris, just so you're aware. So we'll push them off to the next episode. But I say that because this has been such a good conversation. But one of the things that I was talking about, so Mac Pros are getting ready to have unupgradable RAM. So
look, I mean, you know what? Here I have something about this. We could talk. This is something Apple's been doing for a very, 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 very long time. Before the SSD was mainstream, Apple was using it because they wanted that instant on. You know what else they wanted? They didn't want you to be able to upgrade their computer. They wanted you to throw that thing in the trash and go buy another one. And so they made this little special SSD for just them.
And they still try to use them.
But everybody's following that lead. Dell now solders DRAM. You have business grade laptops with 8 gig soldered down or 16 soldered down and one slot and one open slot. So they're all going to this, and it's all in the name of aesthetic and slimming it down because we can put all of them and just mount them to the boards.
Oh yeah. Well, and to me, like, you look at it that way, I like just that thought process of now they're saying that likely, and like I said, this is all rumor mill discussion, but like this doesn't surprise me at all, because if you go to the Mac, if you go to a M2 based or whatever based chip they end up calling it for the Mac Pro, because it's an SoC, because you go to that, there isn't going to be support for DIMMs and things like that. They're going to have to solder. You're going to have to buy what you want when you get it and get what you get, and you're going to have to pay that premium to buy it, which is what Apple wants you to do in the first place. They want you to pay that premium, and if you don't pay that premium, you get mad and have to go back and buy it again. It's double spend your money, basically.
They will. I mean, well, I mean, look, I'll tell you this. I agree with you 100%, and we're starting to see this with other products as well as we move and evolve in those products. I'm a believer in this, and this may get some blowback, but I believe that that's what Tesla's trying to do. Tesla's trying to do with the car what Apple's done with the phone: lock you into lock you into an ecosystem and turn it into a gadget that you essentially just replace every 2 years. That's what I believe Tesla is trying to do.
I wouldn't be surprised with that thought process. And I'll go a mild step further than that and say that if you want to go, doing away with the internal combustion engine as a whole from a vehicle perspective you do like it can't be physically done long term.
Look, everybody, like I know people, and I'm in California. I'm in California. I see more Teslas and all that than I see a lot of other things, right? It's not electric, and it's not only electric. There's going to be many of things. I think it's going to be a mix of hydrogen and everything else. It's not just going to be it's not just going to be electric. It can't be. It doesn't make sense.
Well,
Our electrical grid can't even handle what we have.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
God's sake. I'm talking to the energy guy. And we're also still in a country that is still so virtually freaked out about nuclear energy when, we've also moved in that technology as well, right? Like everybody just thinks of Chernobyl and these bad things that happened, but like those are very minor issues compared to what the clean energy that it can produce and how far that technology has moved along. So we got a lot of ways to go in that kind of stuff.
And man, we could discuss this for days on end.
I'll be honest with you guys. If you guys want to do this again, and I would love to come back and do it and chat with you guys because I wrote a report on nuclear energy, and my wife's dad was an engineer for the DOE, so he'll tell me. I've had lots of conversations with him about nuclear energy.
I have spent my time in reactor buildings. Oh, the things,
yeah, I know. I see
the things that I have done, and I mean that's we can kind of come to a close with this and have a little closing, mild conversation on this. But technology in general, not just memory, but memory as a whole has affected the way that we operate with technology because, like you said, phone in your pocket, computer in your pocket, the amount that you can do with it these days, very powerful. But also the memory that had gone with that had to increase and substantially grow and build out, and to the point of, yes, this is the 1 terabyte version of the iPhone. Why do I have the 1 terabyte version? People always ask me that. They go, what do you do with a terabyte? You're never going to fill it up. It's got a LiDAR sensor on it now, ladies and gentlemen. It's got all these other purposes, the camera applications, photo sizes, everything. As you add more clarity to the world, and from an energy perspective, we have that conversation to go with this. As you add more diversity from a energy perspective to the world, you have to also recognize that there is a need for something to be behind that, to store, to back you up, if you want to say it. And that, to me, that's always that's where nuclear lives. As the person in the energy sector, nuclear is always that backbone, base load, gonna help you out when you need it, running 24/7, 365 kind of thing. And as a energy proponent and understanding, what's in vogue to be built right now, everybody wants solar, talks about wind. But what nobody ever talks about when they talk about those things is, how do you get that power someplace? How do you do the things that you want to do with things, just like memory, when, how do you get it to when you need it, when it's not available? If it's not available, that's where the downside to things is. And, to the point of there's companies out there, just in conversations with other energy companies that I get to have. I mean, from a storage perspective, there are people out, in mountainous terrains talking about building massive pump storage hydro facilities underground. Why? Because a pump storage hydro facility is a giant battery. Why underground, though? Well, if you've ever been through the permitting process of building a lake, it is damn near impossible these days because nobody wants to give up their precious land. Nope. And land is the one thing you cannot, once it's gone, it's gone. You're not out here. We're not China out here building islands in the middle of the South China Sea.
No.
And because those eventually, just so everybody's aware, knowledgeable, those will disappear. They're what they're built on, the foundations that they're built on, just like anything else. The man that builds his foundation on sand, it's gonna wash away, and it'll only take a couple of big hurricanes out in the South China Sea for them to disappear.
Well, or one of the big, like, and if we're the world heats up and the oceans rise, those days I've seen those. We've all seen pictures of those islands. They're what, like they're like 6 feet above the water, if that. It's not like they're mountainous terrain.
Well, and as the climate changes, as somebody that's not a climate denier in the first place, science is what backs all of my decisions. So I'd like to have this fun little bit, and this is what cracks me up to people that don't quite understand it. But as the climate changes, as it warms or cools, whatever you want to say, as man introduces different, entities, whether it be CO2, any other kind of gas into the environment will always react to that. And one of the ways that it reacts to a heating climate is that you end up with more rain. Now, you end up with more rain in places you don't want more rain. So you end up with things where you see, like the Sahara Desert could become a more tropical climate. Now, what's the problem with that? The Sahara Desert and its storms blow all their fertile sands across the ocean to the very fertile, the very fertile Brazilian rainforests. So if you're distributing that sand back there and it's no longer being distributed, guess what? You get a desert in one place where you had and a rainforest in another. Things just start to manipulate and swap. They almost always stay similar, but it changes the way humans who are external to the environment have to react. And how do we grow as a human race and population? One, we recognize that we're not growing as a population anymore. That's a sad fact that, Chris is contributing to, but I'm not, because I have 0 children. But the population growth has actually almost leveled out, and so our knowledge for things has not. And where are we going to store it all? That's the way I like to look at it.
Well, you hit it. It's all got to go somewhere, and we're like, I just, we can't, like you said, man. And we'll just, it's going to be multiple things that we all have to look at. It's not just going to be one thing. It's going to be a mix of things, and we're just in a time of where change is going to happen, and I think people are just going to have to be uncomfortable for a little bit, or you're just going to go to a different pump. You know what I mean? You're going to put something different in your car. That's really all it is.
And that's the key. Just being open to change is probably the hardest things that we as a human race have ever had, but that's the thing that you got to be. If you're open to change, you'll find out very quickly there's a lot of good that can come from that change. Just
Amen.
Be mindful. So that we don't hit the 2-hour mark on this, because it's kind of funny, because I did start it a little early from a streaming perspective. Okay. We'll wrap up and say, and I leave the comment to you, and then we'll close it. But give in 5,000 words or less. I use that. But give the best description for what. So truly, when you look at memory, and then you look at like the actual storage memory, so NAND flash to me, what's the real difference there, and how is that changing? Like I said, like we discussed with CXL and stuff.
Well, okay, so I think what's real, like the difference is DRAM is the sprinter. Okay, DRAM is the guy who's fast. He's the sprinter, and the NAND is like the elephant that can carry the big load across the wide range, right? And you got to remember, when you turn off power, DRAM doesn't store anything. NAND does. Where you're going to see is CXL is going to merge those two and kind of give NAND the sprinting speed I think it needs to go to the next level. And then you're probably going to see something like that, where you have that storage that is fast. And most people come a couple of generations along will probably never even understand what, click and all of that stuff. It'll be instant.
Oh, the generations that have the what do you call it? That instant gratification.
Yes.
They will be much more intrigued. Well, yes. I have to say, Jake, this has been a heck of a conversation. We will do it again. Have no fear.
Yeah, let me know. I had a great time. It's the first time I ever done anything like this, so I had a great time. I enjoyed talking with both of you guys. So thank you for having me. Let me know how I can help you guys and do this again.
Absolutely. We'll probably have us a fun little energy conversation in the next one. That's something that me and Chris in the long run need to start having. See,
Yeah.
get some real discussions that way. But to close it out, guys, I'm Brad. He's Chris.
I'm Chris.